Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of the program. With me, as usual, is my partner in ideological crime, as I like to say, Don Cooney. Don is from the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University, and he is also the Vice Mayor of the city of Kalamazoo, and very, very busy in that capacity in recent months. And joining us today as a new regular viewmeister.
Yay.
That's what we
Yes.
used to be called.
Viewmeister.
Viewmeister,
Okay.
yeah. That's what Bill O'Brien called us. So, anyway, Denise Keele. Welcome, Denise. Denise is a professor in the Department of Political Science. She also is in the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability at Western Michigan University.
Yes.
And she's also the chair of the Climate Change Working Group.
Is that still true? I've been gone for a year.
Oh yeah, we kept your
Oh,
chair.
they're waiting. They kept it warm for me.
For you. So Denise just got back from a sabbatical leave.
Yes.
And you were traveling throughout southern Germany.
Yes.
And so why don't you tell us, well, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
You've been a guest on the program before, so you're not completely new to this program. You've been a guest on a number of occasions, but now we're bringing you in as a full-fledged, regular member of the group.
That's right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and then a little bit about that sabbatical leave and what you were doing in Germany. Sounds fascinating.
Sure. So yeah, I got to make my television debut on this show a couple years ago, I think. And then I did do Monday Night Live a couple of times as well. So everybody is clear on this. But thanks for asking me, and I'm really honored to be part of you guys and do this with you. So just quickly about myself, actually I have an undergraduate and master's in forestry. So I came up in the natural sciences through that program and worked out in the field for a few years before I decided that the earth was really ruled by politics and not science.
You learned that quickly.
I still walk that line, or try to.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've identified all the trees I once learned in school. But I went back and got my PhD in political science and in environmental politics so that I could better persuade and influence the decisions that were being made about the resources that I saw. And so I kind of walk that line. So every once in a while I might still know something about science, but mostly I do politics now, and my expertise is environmental politics. I met Don mostly through the Superfund site here in the Kalamazoo River, so we've done a lot of work on that. And as Ron mentioned, we got to know each other through Western's Climate Change Working Group, which I have the honor of herding most of those activities. And I've been on sabbatical for a year, so that's why I'm so refreshed and said yes to a new idea, I suppose. I get asked things and I just say yes. So
we asked you at the exact right time.
The exact right time. I was rested and feeling good. You know, sabbatical is a great thing with an academic tenure system. It's not that I was tired of working, but it is a very good principle to take a break and do something different. And I got to go to southern Germany, 2 different states in southern Germany for almost 3 months. And I visited almost 30 cities, interviewed just over 60 people in positions like what Don holds, mayors and bureaucrats in all of these towns, about what they were doing to transition their energy resources to adapt to climate change. And across the board, innovative, wonderful ideas about transportation, about how to do wind and solar, and how to really involve their communities in that. So part of my dream is to bring some of those ideas home. The Germans are the leader in renewable energy. 40% of their country is powered by wind or solar at this moment. And you know, Bill McKibben likes to say they're at a higher latitude than most of the United States. So if they can do solar, we sure can here.
They have lots of clouds there.
Exactly, exactly. So I got to learn and really, and get to live there too for almost 3 months. So that, that was a fantastic experience. And again, I'm looking forward to bringing that stuff home. And these guys should get some credit. You know, I've learned just a little bit about this show and all the folks behind the scenes who are doing all of this work. You guys have been doing this for a while, and KNOW, Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War, was a start to this, and there was a WMU Forum show, so I'm in the hands of experts here. I feel very comfortable and glad to be a part of the legacy that you guys have created. So thanks for having me.
We're very happy to have you on the program.
Yeah, we are.
I warned Ron, I come with energy, so.
Good, that's what we need.
We need a little
0 or 100%, so.
renewable energy.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
renewables.
right.
Well, just, so
Yeah.
you were in Baden-Baden,
I
Germany,
was.
which is where my grandfather,
Yes.
John, came from.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was really cool that you got to visit
Yeah,
Baden-Baden, which is a
Kramer.
fabulous little city in
It's a
Germany,
spa
isn't it?
town. It is.
Yeah.
It is for centuries been the opera house and the baths,
The baths,
for the
it's-
mineral baths there, and so
Wow.
still going on. You know, this is what happens when you actually conserve your resources. You
Yeah.
still can take a mineral bath in this town,
it's a big
just like the Romans
holiday
did. It was
destination.
very cool.
Yeah, yeah. And we should mention also that there's a new book out by political scientist Benjamin Barber,
Yes,
which is
yes.
called Cool Cities.
Cool cities. That's
And it fits perfectly
I
in with
know.
what you were doing,
Yes.
because what Barber argues, and we'll come back and talk about
Yeah.
this on another show at greater length, but what Barber argues is that nation states aren't really doing the job,
That's right.
despite the Paris Agreement,
Yep.
which was important and necessary, but ultimately
right.
inadequate.
Yes.
But nation states haven't really gotten their act together to do much about climate change.
That's
but
right.
most of the action has taken place with
At
cities.
the local level.
And
Yep.
cities are doing a lot
That's right.
in the United States and Germany, all around the world. And so
Yes.
Benjamin Barber really focuses on that idea
That's
in
right.
this book called Cool Cities.
Yeah.
So we'll have to come back and talk about
Yes.
that.
Yes, I would love to talk about that. It's exactly, you know, and I don't want anyone to think that we don't need more national action.
Yes, right.
Just
exactly.
because cities are doing
Right.
great things, we still need a lot of other things to happen on that front. But Kalamazoo is one of them. I'd love to talk about that book and have the
Yeah.
city. You know, I know we're doing a climate action plan now for
Right.
Kalamazoo.
That
That's-
Paul drew up is
That's
kind
right.
of, we've kind of embraced that. But
That's
I'd
right.
love to sit down with you and talk about what you've learned from all those
Yeah.
other cities over there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Great.
exactly,
Well, we'll
exactly.
definitely tap into that.
Yeah.
Today, I think we decided that it probably would be best to focus again on the issue of healthcare. This has been a persisting issue because during the first months of the Trump administration, with complete Republican control now of the federal government, there has been an effort to repeal and replace. How many times have we heard
This is-
repeal and replace?
Yeah.
And the Republicans have definitely attempted to do that. For 7 years, while the Affordable Care Act has been in existence, we've heard that mantra from the Republicans. And when they finally got their chance to really do something, as it turned out, they didn't really know quite what to do.
Yes.
They didn't really have, I mean, certainly they were strong on the repeal part,
Yeah.
but the replace part, they didn't really have a clear idea about what they wanted to do. So Don, let's talk a little bit about this process. And of course, it resulted most recently in a vote in the Senate in which
Dramatic.
Very
dramatic vote where John McCain, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins,
Collins,
three
yeah.
Republican senators, joined with the Democrats to defeat the skinny plan,
Right.
the
Yes.
one version of repeal and not replace very much. But let's talk a little bit about that process, because you've been very active trying to mount the opposition and resistance locally. And it seems to me that that's one of the things that really made a difference, that groups like the one you've been involved with, resisting, putting pressure on the senators, really played a key role in this victory to maintain the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, I was at a meeting with Senator Stabenow about 3 weeks ago, and she said at that meeting that the only thing that stopped it from going right through was the people all over the country
Yeah.
who were mounting the opposition. And that really was the key thing. So when you look at it, they wanted to repeal and replace, but they had so many different ideas
That's right.
about how to do that, they couldn't come together at all.
Yeah.
So what was interesting was how everybody was shut out of the process except the Republicans. There were no hearings at all. They made sure there were no hearings, because if there were any hearings, what they were proposing would have been opposed by every single healthcare group in the country, the hospital associations, the American Heart Association, American Lungs, everyone, the AARP would have spoken out against what they were proposing. And they wouldn't allow any of the Democrats to be involved, and they had no women on the Senate committee that was deciding what was going to happen
Yeah.
with health care that was going to dramatically affect women especially.
Yeah, even a lot of the Republican senators were cut out of the process.
Oh,
They
yeah.
they had no idea what was going to be in the
right.
bill till it actually
Right,
got
they
to
had
them
no idea
an hour
at all.
before they had to vote.
So as it went on, what became clear was there were two things at stake. One was, we have to keep these promises we made to the people that we're going to repeal this thing and replace it. Above all, we got to do that. The second thing we got to do is we got to save the insurance companies. Nothing about health care.
Yeah.
That was way down the line.
Yeah.
And all the time, the president is saying, we're going to give you more affordable health care. Everybody's going to be covered. And then when you look at what they're proposing, none of that is true.
Exact opposite.
The exact opposite.
right.
Total lies. So it was tough. I mean, and it was close. And it went down to the very, very end. I want to say that our congressman had a huge part in getting this as far as it went.
Yeah.
Because when the House bill originally came out, Congressman Upton said that he would not vote for that. And then the next
And
day,
at that point, it would have failed.
it would have failed.
It would have failed without Upton's support
Exactly.
and a couple of other moderate Republicans.
Yep.
It wasn't going to pass, and so
Yeah.
the whole process would have ended right there.
Exactly.
There would have been nothing for the Senate to
That would have
even
been
work
it,
on.
right there. Yeah. But then the next day he had a meeting with President Trump, which I understand was not all love and roses either. And there was some pretty sharp exchanges. But he came out of there all smiles and said everything's okay now. They're going to put $8 billion into some kind of a fund that
Which
will...
was a drop in the bucket
a
for what
drop
would be
in the
necessary.
bucket. And when you think about it, what our health care bill is for the nation, it's like a fifth of the nation's expenditures, which is
Yeah.
about over about $3 trillion a year.
That's
And they're going to put $8 billion in over 5 years.
And the critical issue, if I remember right, was the fact that people with pre-existing
Yeah.
conditions would still be protected, and so they were going to set up a separate fund.
Separate fund.
That if the states did try to discriminate or make it more difficult for people who had
Yeah.
pre-existing conditions, that this fund would make
They
up
could
and
draw
help
on
them.
that
They
fund.
could draw on this fund, but
Yeah.
of course it was totally inadequate.
Totally inadequate.
Totally inadequate. I mean, Fred Upton should have been ashamed of himself.
Yeah.
He should have absolutely been ashamed of himself, because that was just a total fig leaf for
Yeah.
him to hide behind, to then go ahead and vote for this bill, which would hurt millions and millions and millions of Americans.
Millions of Americans.
Yeah.
So that gave other so-called moderate Republicans coverage.
That's right.
Saying, okay, Fred and there was another congressman in I can remember recognized as a moderate Republican. Now they got the coverage and they did that. So now with that cover,
Oh, by the way, Don, let's also point out that as soon as the House approved it, there was a big party
Yes.
on the lawn of the White House.
Yes.
Right? Let's not
Yes.
forget the big party that
Exactly.
took place, right? And there's all these Republican congressmen going up to the White House, and they're celebrating like they had just won the Super
Right.
Bowl.
That's right.
And of course, the bill had just passed the House.
Just
It still
passed
had
the
to
House.
pass the Senate,
The
and there was
Senate.
still a
That's
long
right.
road to go.
Right.
But there they were celebrating the fact that they had just voted to take health care away from millions of Americans.
right,
That they had just voted to hurt the American people in a very drastic way, and they were celebrating on the lawn of the White House about that.
Yeah, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that their bill would, I think, 19 million people
that was the-
would lose their
That was the
health
low
care.
end, I
And that was the
think.
conservative
the low
estimate,
end,
right?
yeah.
of-
Yeah, at
yes.
least that.
Okay, so
So that was a celebration, right? So now it went to the Senate, and the Senate was all closed doors, nobody allowed in to talk about it. And then they would bring these things out, and the senators wouldn't know till about an hour beforehand what they were going to vote on, and they're all going to vote for it. I think that there were a couple things very important to recognize, how the Democrats stuck together on this.
Yes.
Because they had to stick together, because the Republicans would have had enough votes if one Democrat had
right.
had not stuck with it. But then, as you mentioned, Ron, the two women were so strong, were great, and held out. And then finally, John McCain, in the end, held out. And it was dead. They couldn't pass it. So that was very, very significant. So now the question is, what's next? So the Senate doesn't seem to know where to go, but there are a group of House members who are calling themselves the problem solvers, which Fred Upton has now joined. There's 43 of them, Democrats and Republicans, who are saying, okay, we're going to solve this problem now. And what they're proposing is, first of all, let's stop the bleeding. Let's make sure that the subsidies that were guaranteed to the insurance companies by the Affordable Care Act will be in place for the coming year. Let's stop the bleeding. Let's get that straight.
And Trump has threatened to basically cut those
That's
subsidies, right?
He has, except yesterday, the Congress made it more difficult for him to do that.
That's right.
Okay.
Because they're organizing to keep those in place. Because if he were to do that, it would really kill the Affordable Care Act. It would collapse the insurance markets in health insurance.
Yeah, it's not like Trump has talked about, well, we'll let it collapse, we'll let it die. Well, no, it won't die, but he could plot to murder it.
That's right.
And that's what he's plotting to do. He's plotting to kill.
Yeah.
He could take some actions that would kill it. If he just steps back and allows it to continue, it's not going to die because it's actually doing quite well.
It's doing well.
Although it has some issues that need to be dealt with, right?
There are issues that need to be dealt with. Some of the exchanges are not working in some of the states, in some counties around. I think it's 0.3% of the exchanges around the country are not working properly. But insurance rates are going up, and a lot of that's going up because of the uncertainty of whether they're going to keep those things there. So right now, both sides, or well, the House especially, but the Senate now is sort of flirting with the idea of let's, like McCain asked for, let's do this the way we do other bills. Let's have public hearings. Let's have some kind of a discussion on this. Let's open this up. And that would be a wonderful thing to do. But the
Denise, just on that point, how different was this process from what we would normally see in Congress?
Very different.
I mean, it was radically different, wasn't it? I mean,
absolutely. And this is, one of the biggest things that I talk about with our federal level politics right now is how partisan we've become. And the Pew Center does some great research and polling on this. Over the last 20 years, it's like 25-point spread now between Republican and Democrat. And not only that, when you ask a Republican or a Democrat what they think about the other party, it's not that I disagree with you or I, just don't really like your policies. They believe you're a threat to the other, to the country. And so that has really, and we've seen it over the last 20 years, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse of this partisanship and this saying, the winner take all system. All right, so I won 51%, therefore I rule 100%, and I will shut everybody else out of this process, and we're going to do what we want to do. That ignores the other 49% of America. Again, I got to go to Europe. Germans and the multi-party system do that a little bit differently, right? You cannot ignore even 5% vote of the population there, right?
Everybody's got to be involved in the process.
That's right, and so we've really gone to this. We won, and that means we won everything, and we don't have to listen to anybody else anymore. And that's a huge problem for what you're talking about. Civil society is what we're talking about, and that includes everyone.
Right. Now, I think in Germany, isn't it true that if you get 10% of the vote in the election, you get 5%, then you get seats in the parliament. And this way we have it set up is a two-party system, which just excludes.
And so you're able to do these kinds of things. And most of the time we've seen, you're supposed to have the representative who is the civil servant, right? And most of the time we've seen over history folks step into that role, kind of like John McCain eventually did, and say, the process and the institution is more important than this particular policy issue that we could maybe win on today. And you need real civil servants to be saying those things and obeying these processes in order for them to remain legitimate, right? Because then the other side just distrusts the other side more, and you get caught into the loop that we're in right now where nothing gets done. So I'm encouraged. I did not know about this bipartisan
in the House.
problem solutions.
The problem solvers.
And they're trying to have an equal number of Republicans
There's a
and
climate
Democrats.
solutions caucus trying to do the same thing. So I think you've got some folks recognizing part of the problem is the process. And we've gone way into the land of abnormal on how that process is run.
Our system has always been a little bit of an outsider compared to the rest of the world, because most of the rest of the world has proportional representation.
As a multi-party coalition government
system. But now with the more extreme political polarization, it's distorted even that process much more to make it even more difficult for the Congress to get anything accomplished, to do any kind of governing.
That's exactly right.
And I would recommend a book called Democracy in Chains by Nancy McLean, who wrote she's written a history of what has happened since the the mid-50s she starts in, but it's especially in the 70s
Yes.
when we did that switch.
That's right.
And the Koch brothers were so involved in all this.
Yes.
And the idea was to foment that polarization.
That's right.
And to make it more and more difficult. Because the question really is, why can't our government do what the American people are asking them to
Want it to
do?
do.
I mean, the vast majority of American people
That's
want
right.
a system that covers everybody.
That's right.
They believe that the American healthcare system should be available to everybody.
Yes.
But that we're so far from democracy. We got democracy in chains.
Yeah.
So that's a big piece.
Yep.
So the big question is now, where are we going to go? And more people are taking seriously the idea of a Medicare for All system.
Yeah.
The Physicians for a National Health Program, which has over 15,000 members, most of them, the vast majority of them, doctors, are strongly advocating for Medicare for All. John Conyers, once again, has introduced his bill in Congress for a single-payer system, and there are 113 co-sponsors of that
great.
now. And Democratic local parties around the country are endorsing that. And our local Democratic Party here has endorsed John Conyers' plan.
That's great.
So there is a widespread movement towards single payer. Now, that's going to be tough because a lot of people, I was surprised to read that only 5 to 8% of the American people get their health care through private insurance, either on the exchange or by buying private insurance. The vast majority of the American people get their health care either through employment,
Employers.
Medicare, or Medicaid.
Yeah.
Medicaid now covers 75 million people in the country. So people that are getting their health care through their employers,
Yep.
and they're more or less okay.
Yeah.
It's not great, but it's okay. So we got a lot to do here to work on this. But we know from every other industrialized country in the world that we would save trillions of dollars by moving in that direction, that we would get way better health care for our people, that we would be able to move up, because right now the World Health Organization rates us at 33rd in the world in the health care that we provide for our people. So the battleground is right now. There's an opening here. I'm reminded of the shock doctrine, where they're ready to move in here and throw something in there that's not going to help us.
That's
It'd be
right.
a compromise that's really not going to be the solution.
Yeah.
So I think it's time for us to advocate very strongly to move toward a system that is really going to do what the American people deserve.
Don, I want to come back to one point that you mentioned that I think is really important from a political point of view, and that's the unity of the Democratic Party on this issue right now. And from what you're saying now, I understand that's even at a local level right now.
That's right.
You know, one of the things, so when we look at, well, what variables would shape public policy, you've got public opinion, right, which we can all do a lot about, and thank you for holding the rallies and being part of those here in Kalamazoo. But it's also who's the majority in power, and is that unified government,
That's
right?
right.
And I would argue that the Republican Party, even though it's in control, right, 51%, and 33 of the state legislatures are also
that's right.
Republican controlled right now. But there are lots of factions within the Republican Party right now, is also why you're seeing them wanting to do the behind the closed doors and leaving out members of their own party, because there's such a spectrum within the Republican Party now. Even though they're in power, they're not unified.
That's
and
right.
so what that then reverts to in politics is whatever the status quo is, whatever you already have, it's much more difficult to change that, right? So we have to be a little thankful that Obama spent most of his political capital on getting this bill through a few years ago, because now it is the status quo, and it's much harder to change something, especially when your party isn't unified like that.
That's right.
Right? And the Democrats now have a rallying call, right? And it is easier to be the party of opposition, as any Republican will tell you.
Yes.
Much easier to be the party of opposition, but that's been a really interesting trend to see the Republican Party get that majority and then fraction.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I think that's such an important point. So we've been strong locally. We had 260 people in the park for one of our
That's
rallies,
fantastic.
and we will be doing. We had asked our congressman to hold a public meeting on healthcare. We especially wanted him to explain his vote to his constituents. How was this good for your constituents that you voted this way? Of course, he's not going to do that. So we will be holding a public meeting on healthcare outside Congressman's office on Michigan Avenue across from the YWCA on August the 16th at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
All
Great.
right, I'm sure Fred will come out and talk with you at that point.
We've invited him.
So where we're at now is,
Yeah.
okay, so Fred is joined together with some other people, moderates in his party and some Democrats to try to work on some kind of a bipartisan fix, if you will, or reform of the the Affordable Care Act, right? And so that's one thing that's likely to go forward. Now, what's also happened, of course, has been a huge boost to the idea of a single-payer system.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a survey done by Pew, you mentioned Pew earlier.
They're one of the best pollers.
What they found is that 60% of the American people think that health care for all is the responsibility of government.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Health care for all is the
60%.
responsibility, 60%.
Yeah.
So there is political muscle there.
That's right.
If it can be mobilized effectively.
Yeah.
And moving forward now, one of the things that I've heard recently, and what we're seeing, okay, with regard to the cool cities idea, or just again, as Trump took us out of the Paris Agreement, we saw states stepping forward. Jerry
That's
Brown
right.
in California, for example,
Yes.
saying we're
Right.
going to still
Yes.
abide by it, we're going to do this,
Yes.
that, and the other thing. It seems to me that might happen with regard
With
to
healthcare.
universal health care. So the candidate
Yeah.
for the Democratic for the governorship in Maryland, Ben Jealous,
Ben Jealous.
has said that he's going to implement a statewide single-payer system if he gets elected.
Right.
So what do you think about what's
yeah.
going to happen if states step forward and start to do this? Can they effectively do this? Will that add to the political pressure on the Congress? What's going to happen if that happens?
No, I
Denise?
think
You're the political scientist.
Well, I'll
right?
let Don, because
Oh,
he's
God.
he's
I
the
don't know.
policy expert on this
Well, I'm
area.
not a policy,
but,
but I think it's a very good idea. I
Yeah.
think it could work. I think Massachusetts.
I was going to say
has had
Massachusetts.
some pretty
and
good
don't they have
success.
I'm not familiar enough with their system to know whether it's single payer or how it actually
I think
works.
it is
but
a
I think
form of
it's very
single
close to
payer,
that.
and
yeah.
it's working. Yeah, it's working up
Yeah.
there. Vermont didn't work so well.
That's
But I
right.
think there was some
Yeah.
flaws in the way it was set up.
Yeah.
California was all set to do it.
Yeah, and then
And then,
and
yeah.
then the head, I don't remember what his position was, but a Democrat
That's
I
right.
think-
stopped it.
I think the Speaker of the House was
Speaker of the
pulled
House
the-
stopped
pulled the
it.
plug
Yeah.
on it. Yeah.
But I think that is very, very possible of
Yeah.
a way to go. I heard Ben Jealous speak in Chicago. He was at that conference, and he was
Yeah.
talking about that, and it made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This
it could
is-
happen that way.
This is always the fundamental tension, the way that we have set up our country. We have two sovereigns, right? We have the states and we have the federal government.
Yeah.
And those powers not given to the federal government in the Constitution are supposed to be the purview of the state. And so, folks will argue these things, right? Well, the Constitution also says promote the general health, welfare. So is that a federal jurisdictional issue, right? And then folks like to argue these things because what they want to do is put that power back in the state's hands. That's what a lot of the last version of the bill was, to slim it down, give the money to the states, let the states decide how to do that, so that if you are in a very conservative area, you're going to vote with your feet, right?
Yeah.
You can move around, and in different areas would have different systems. That's okay for some issues. It's not great for issues like health or environment, where we're really talking about a collective issue and a collective risk pool, right?
I think
And a
it's-
fundamental human right.
And a human
yeah,
right
a fundamental.
Fundamental
to clean
human
water,
right that
clean
should be
air,
protected.
and health care. I mean,
Yeah.
those are rights that we can provide to everyone. And what happens when you only provide them in some places and not others?
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's the problem. And that's the role of the federal government, right?
Yeah.
When you have these collective issues, and you need a large risk pool with something like health care to make it work, right? You need young people and everybody paying into the same thing, and that's where we get in trouble with the states' rights arguments on these issues.
And we have examples all around the world
Absolutely.
where this has been done, and it's
Yes.
been done very effectively. I mean, all we have to do is look to the Scandinavian countries,
That's
for
right.
example.
Absolutely.
The kind of social democracy. I mean, a lot of people might say, well, Scandinavia, they're socialists. They're not socialists.
No, they're not.
They're
No,
not
they're
socialists. Those are
capitalist
still
countries.
capitalist countries.
Yes.
They are capitalist countries, however, where the public sector plays in a very
That's
important
right.
role. So this term social democracy
Yep.
suggests that there's a strong role for the national government to play,
That's right.
even within a capitalist society. And so what we find is that we have very effective governmental structures
Yeah.
that invest in their people,
That's
that,
right.
that take responsibility for the health and safety and welfare
That's
and
right.
education, protection of the environment for all of their citizens. And
Yes.
they do it very effectively.
Yes.
And so we have great models of where people do invest in their children and invest in their society to the benefit of the
Yeah.
vast majority. And what the result of
Yeah.
that is that you have far less economic inequality,
That's-
for one thing, but you also have much greater protection for the health and welfare of the people. So there are models out there.
That's right.
And to me, one of the great things, if any good thing came out of this Republican effort, is that it has now once again stimulated a debate about a single-payer system or
Yes.
a Medicare
Yes.
for
For
all
all,
system.
right.
The fact that universal access to health care should be a fundamental right of all Americans.
Right.
Now, why don't we have it? We don't have it because we have a parasitic health insurance industry
Yes.
that will politically block it through money and lobbying and
That's
their
right.
efforts in the Congress.
Yeah.
And again, I've said this before on the show, they contribute absolutely nothing
No.
to the process.
I know.
What do the health insurance companies contribute to the process? Absolutely nothing. They're a huge middleman taking out, sucking out profits
That's
from
right.
the system, taking out tax money that could be spent on people, and they're
Yes.
sucking out all these profits, but they don't contribute one single thing
That's right.
to the health care of the American people.
No.
Why do we need them? We don't need them.
That's
And
right.
the rest of the world shows that you don't need
don't need
them
them.
to provide effective health care.
No.
But this is, of course, a thorny political issue. How are we going to deal with the enormous political power
That's
right.
that these
That's it.
corporations, and the pharmaceutical corporations are also in there, because they
Yep.
they can continue to gouge the American people and gain huge profits by maintaining the current system. So this is essentially a matter of political power and political will.
Yes.
And the American people, I think, are woefully uneducated about
Those
a
influences.
single-payer system, the benefits of it, because, again, these industry groups have been able to scare up
Right.
the boogeyman of socialized medicine, and
That's right.
you won't be able to choose your own doctor, and all these horror stories. There's long
right.
waiting lists, and and they've thrown up all this propaganda, most of which is simply not true,
That's true.
No.
to try to obscure the benefits of
Exactly.
moving to such a system. And we're the only country in the world, the only major industrial country in the world that doesn't go this
Exactly.
route.
That's right.
Exactly. You talk. It's the same thing you talked about with science.
It's exactly.
The science is clear.
That's right.
But to get to where we need to go, that's a political
That's
issue.
exactly right.
I would like to point out that they estimate that the healthcare bill is about between a fifth and a sixth of the total gross national product. So that is approximately just short of $5 trillion.
Yeah.
Everybody who is seriously looking at this admits that if we went to cut out the insurance companies and went to a single payer system, we would immediately save 15 to 20% of our health care bill nationally. So 15 to 20% of $5 trillion, we'd be able to cover everybody with that kind of thing. So there's no logical reason
No.
why we don't move there. It's a question of power.
That's right.
And these people are keeping us away from it. I think there's a great parallel between what's happening with climate change.
Absolutely.
It's about convincing the American people, and the same thing with cigarettes.
That's right.
That there's an article by Paul Krugman today in the New York Times talking about, as this process went on healthcare, all of a sudden these people that were speaking against healthcare began to say, well, wait a minute now, it is helping me. How come they thought the opposite before?
That's right.
Because of a public relations campaign that convinced them
That's
that
right.
this was not good for them.
That's exactly right. And the power issue, it's so easy to play on fear, right? And,
Yeah.
and we see that in all of these issues that have been mentioned, to play on the fear for the corporate interests. Ron's a specialist in corporate crime, right? Well, what happens when you have a system like healthcare and it's a classic market failure is what it is?
Yes.
That's the role of government then, classically. Even in our representative democracy, the role of government is to step in and smooth out those market failures. And what we've done in this country is we still have, and we wear it with a little pride, our distrust in government, right?
Yeah.
Our individualistic tendencies. And that's not always a bad thing, but when you don't let government take over those things, which is a tune that rings very clear to the Republican and conservative stump speech, right?
Right.
The big bad government's going to be taking over your life and it'll be terrible because we want privatization. Well, when you don't let the government step in, then you just replace that with corporate power and greed and power, and that's what happens. And
Private
they're not out for
tyranny.
anybody, exactly, for
Yeah,
anybody. And
right.
they're controlling many of our politicians, right, with those donations. And we've caught ourselves in this other loop that without the government stepping in and doing some of these things.
And in Scandinavia and in other places in Europe where we do see a strong social democracy
right.
emerging, it historically was the power of the working classes that
That's right.
put political
Yeah.
pressure that allowed those things to be accomplished.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't really have a political
Yeah.
party representing labor
That's
in
right.
the United
That's
States.
right.
Now, the Democratic Party has at
Yeah.
times
Yeah.
historically
Yes.
moved in that direction,
That's
right?
right.
But the reality is that part of the problem here is the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Part of the
Absolutely.
problem is a Democratic Party that does not fully represent the interests of the working class. And
That's
so
right.
what happened during this last election? There were huge swaths of the white working class that decided, hey,
I'd be better
Donald
off.
Trump might be a better bet than
Right.
That's
to
right.
have a Hillary Clinton who seems to be a typical corporatist Democrat
exactly right.
who's going to impose big government and not really help me.
That's right.
Maybe this guy Trump will help me. Well, of course, that was, something that they're probably going to come to regret greatly, right, after a time.
No.
But nonetheless, this is a real concern that working class interests don't seem to be represented by either political
That's
party
correct.
right
That's
now.
exactly right.
And
Yep.
absent that pressure from the working classes, it's difficult to move
Yep.
in a direction of a social democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump said it well in the campaign where he said, look, I could shoot somebody in the middle of Times Square and it wouldn't make a difference. Because it wasn't what he said.
No,
He was the symbol that he was not them.
that's right.
He was against these guys that got power and they're leaving us out.
Yep.
So he was the symbol, they voted for him, and that's how we ended up with this guy.
Right.
But you're right, that both parties have abandoned the middle class and the working people, I mean by that. And the working people have been left out, and government hasn't stepped in to
That's
do it.
right. And that's why you see even more of the failure of our two-party system.
That's right.
When both are captured, essentially, by the corporate interests and no one in the middle is getting represented right now, you see even less of the policies that 60% of the American people support. And don't forget, remember, we're also in a time right now of union busting.
Yes.
Not only is
Oh, yeah.
there not anyone representing the working class, as we might have called it, they're effectively taking away the provisions that had
Yeah.
been there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the more shameful things.
Yeah, and any organized political power that labor could provide
right.
is decimated
That's
when
right.
unions get decimated.
Yeah,
so.
we've gone from union membership of 35%
Yeah.
to 9%.
That's right.
And they're on the run. They're
Yeah.
on the run.
Yep.
I really think that underlying this whole thing, there are two issues that really we have to come to grips with. What does democracy mean?
Yeah.
And what does human rights mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I think these are the two fundamental issues that are under attack with what we have right now in this country.
And maybe at some other point we can devote a program to talking about where does the Democratic Party go from here?
That would
Because
be
I
a
think
great
right now
topic.
there's a battle going on for the soul of the the Democratic
Democratic
Party.
That's right.
And Bernie Sanders,
Yes.
showed that if someone moves in the direction of social democracy, that people will respond.
There's a-
And the traditional establishment Democratic Party resisted, and what happened?
Yeah,
that's right.
They got their lunch handed to them in
That's
the
right.
election, an
That's
election
right.
that they should have won relatively
Handily.
easily, right?
Easy.
Especially against this candidate.
Yes.
But they badly miscalculated, and so I think the Democrats really have to do some soul searching. I think they are. And I think there's a struggle going on for which direction the Democratic Party is going to go. So maybe that's a thing we can come back to.
Right. I think
That'd
that's
be
a
fun.
very good issue.
Well, we had hoped to move on to some other issues. The healthcare issue has been so important, and I think we gave a good airing to it right there.
Yeah.
But let's catch up on some of the other things. It's been a while since we've had a chance to get together and chat. Denise, you were off in Germany.
Yes.
But one of the other issues that we've been following has, of course, been the investigation of the Russian attempt to influence the 2016 election, and whatever role or collusion may or may not have been involved with the Trump administration. And so, of course, we talked, I think, at one point about the appointment of the special counsel, as they're called now, Robert Mueller, and Mueller's investigation has been proceeding. And just recently, a new wrinkle was thrown into that, in the sense that it's been revealed that Mueller has been able to convene a grand jury in Washington, D.C. To now assist him in this investigation. So maybe we can talk just a little bit about what that means. Maybe a few people aren't really clear about what a grand jury is, or how a grand jury is different from a petit jury, a regular jury. Denise, you want to take a crack at that?
You probably know more than I do about that.
You should go
one.
in it.
You want
You're
the
up
criminal
on it.
justice guy to do it?
Yeah.
Well, of course, a grand jury is a special kind of legal instrument that is to carry out an investigation.
Right.
Now, grand juries can actually have two different roles. Grand juries are used in many states to routinely screen charges to see if there is probable cause that a crime has been committed and that this person has committed it, to allow the case to move on to the felony court. We don't do that in Michigan, by the way. In Michigan, we don't use grand juries. We operate.
The judge does it, right?
Well, it's the charging document that we use is called a prosecutor's information, as opposed to a grand jury indictment. You have to have a charging document to take somebody into the felony court.
Okay.
And it's either a grand jury indictment or a prosecutor's information. We operate with the prosecutor's information. But someone has to screen that to see if there's probable cause. And in some states, it's the grand jury that does that screening to determine probable cause. In Michigan, we use something called the preliminary hearing, or the preliminary exam. So yes, it is a judge. So a preliminary hearing is a court hearing in which the prosecutor comes in and presents information to back up the request for the information, and for the charges to be moved ahead. And the defense counsel can be there to counter them. And at the end, the judge has to make a determination. This is usually in the lower court, the district court. So the judge has to rule, is there probable cause that a crime has been committed and this person has committed it? If the judge finds probable cause, the case gets advanced on, bound over to the circuit court, the felony court, for trial. So that's how we operate. Now, in many states, they don't use that system. They instead of having a preliminary hearing, they have a grand jury set up to screen the charges the prosecutor brings. Now, the difference with a grand jury is that it's a secret proceeding. And also, the defense is not allowed to be there. So if you're the subject of a grand jury investigation, you may be called to testify to the grand jury, but you can't take your defense attorney with you. And then they can subpoena you, and they can grant you immunity, and they can do all kinds of things. So it's a very different kind of proceeding, and it doesn't take a unanimous vote. Usually a majority vote will gain you an indictment. So a true bill of indictment will be issued, which means that now that's the charging document. Then you'll be bound over to the felony court. Now, so that's the more routine use of the grand jury, but we also have grand juries that can be used as special investigative bodies, and that's what Robert Mueller has done here. He has convened a grand jury to help him in the investigation of the Russian influence in the election and any Trump administration collusion. And so, again, a federal grand jury is usually somewhere between 16 and 23 members. Again, proceedings are in secret, but the grand jury does have subpoena power. So now Mueller will be able to say, you have to come in, or the grand jury you are under subpoena to come in and
That's right.
testify.
And under oath.
Under oath.
Under oath.
And you can be held in contempt.
That's right.
So it grants him greater investigatory powers
Yes.
to carry out
And legitimacy and cover.
Right.
Yeah.
From a
Right.
political point of view, I mean, it's a really kind of a brilliant move, I think. And
Yeah.
this is a very law and order type of move, too.
Yeah,
So,
that's
I
right.
mean, he is a total process guy, and I commend him for doing this. This is a really smart way
Right.
to go about the next stages and staying out of the political fray of it, actually.
And if there were to be criminal charges, it would have to come from a
Have to
grand
come
jury
from the grand
anyhow.
jury, that's
Because
right.
at the federal
Federal
level,
level.
you have to have a grand jury indictment.
okay.
The Fifth Amendment
That's right.
basically states the
Oh.
federal government has to operate with
Because
a
otherwise
grand
they could
jury
just,
indictment.
to use a better word, trump up charges against you.
Yeah, right.
And so now we have the grand jury moving forward. So, but the interesting question still is, okay, now this is going to infuriate Donald Trump even more.
Oh, yes.
He's been angry and upset about this investigation. He's tried to quash it, shall we say obstruct it?
Yeah.
Because I think it's clear. I mean, just prima facie,
Yep.
on the face of it, he has committed obstruction of justice. There's just no doubt
Yeah,
about that.
well,
Firing Comey.
several members of the
Yeah.
previous
Yeah.
members, I guess I should say, of this administration
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
have as well. Yeah.
So, I mean, on the face of it, just firing Comey. And he actually
Yeah.
told Lester Holt on NBC, hey, the reason I fired Comey was because of this
That's
Russia
right.
investigation, which I think is,
That's right.
fabricated. But nonetheless, he said, because I'm trying to
That's right.
stop this investigation, that's why I fired Comey.
Wow.
And he told the Russians in
That's right.
in the Oval Office the same thing. I mean, he's basically admitted on the public record
Mm-hmm.
that he fired the director of the FBI in order to stop an investigation
Right.
into his administration.
Yeah.
That's the very definition of obstruction of justice.
That's right.
So I don't think Mueller's going to have a hard time
Getting that charge, yeah.
Getting that charge. Plus, there's been plenty of other things.
That's
Now,
right.
but the question is Trump going to try to take it further
Mm.
and try now to get rid of Mueller?
Well, isn't the Congress is trying to stop that too?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They're trying to
Yes,
put
which is a
legislation
very
in
interesting thing back to this party unity thing.
Yeah,
You
right,
know, Trump
right.
ran as a Republican, but he essentially has no ideology
No,
as far as
no.
any political scientist can figure out. And the Republicans that are in the majority are starting to figure that out and say we might not want executive power
Yeah.
in some of these issues. And when they can, they are taking that back with in few small ways. So that's been a very interesting development as well. So.
One of the things that struck me that I just in the last couple of days realized how extensive Mueller's efforts are. He has
Yeah.
12 attorneys working
Yeah.
on this now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he just got a very high-powered attorney from New York. I can't remember his name now, but he's nationally recognized as a really strong guy. And-
Especially looking into, I think, financial aspects.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So for me, okay, interfering in the election. We interfere in elections all over the place every time.
I was going to say.
So I can't get all worked up about
Yeah.
that. Collusion is a
Collusion.
different thing. That's a
Correct.
different thing. But for me, the deeper thing is the financial stuff. Is there some kind of link here? I mean, I have heard that when Trump was in deep trouble because of his bankruptcies in Atlantic City, nobody would loan him any money except Russian bankers.
Right.
And they loaned him money, and so he's indebted to them. And that could be a point of manipulation for them. Now, I don't know that that's true, but I'm sure that that's one of the things he's looking into, because Trump has said, now that's a red flag. Don't go into my finances, But he's going to go into his finances. I'm sure he will.
Yeah, and several other things that have happened since we last met was that, number one, it was revealed that Donald Trump Jr.
That's right.
got an offer from some Russians to have a meeting to talk about the fact that the Russians might have had some dirt on Hillary, some incriminating evidence that they could present to the Trump campaign to
Right.
use to go after Hillary Clinton during the
Yes.
election. And Donald Trump said, oh, I love it. If
Yeah,
that's what
right,
you got,
right.
I love
Love
it.
it.
So there's definition of collusion, right?
Well, that's also illegal.
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, there are a number of statutes and constitutional provision, because what's interesting to me is there are prior examples on the record of that happening, and the most recent was Al Gore was offered information about G.W. Bush in that election, and what did Al Gore do? He turned it into the special prosecutor to the general counsel office of the White House.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so we have an example of what
You turn it over to the FBI or some other federal law
what you
enforcement
actually do
officials.
when you're confronted by,
Yeah.
Right.
the situation.
So
instead
that
of,
meeting, and it did take place in Trump Tower,
that's right.
and it wasn't just Donald Trump Jr., but Jared Kushner was there, and Paul Manafort, who at that time was the
That's right.
chair of the Trump campaign
Yep.
committee. So you have essentially three of the very highest officials in the Trump campaign meeting with Russians who have been offering information, dirt on their opponent in the
That's right.
election.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
they did take that meeting. Now they've tried to downplay it, and then we find out that Donald Trump Sr. dictated to Jr. what he should say in response to this.
Yes.
And again, that turned out to be false. Are we surprised that
No.
Donald Trump lies and that he tells a false story?
Right.
A misleading statement. And now it's been revealed that he was the one who dictated that false statement, or misleading statement that was put out. So again, this is more,
Yep.
so now it's almost a sure thing that this grand jury is going to be subpoenaing Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort,
That's
and
right.
Jared Kushner to come in and testify
right.
about that
Right.
particular meeting.
Right.
And what's so interesting is this administration is back to the earlier point of transparency and being civil servants. I mean, this is why you have people that are doing your bidding that aren't actually holding real posts in our government.
Yeah.
This is a problem, folks, right? And we can hold them much more accountable. They don't get executive privilege that way either. So
Right. Right.
he's kind of boxed himself in with some of his family members and other folks who are out there acting as political agents of the office of the president, yet don't hold any official titles. We're not allowed to see what they're really doing. That's, I think, going to be part of this investigation, along with the financial thing. Those are the two things that I would be watching for. But you know what's so hard for me is the American public on this issue, and where folks stand on whether this is just a distraction and we don't care, so what, or whether some Trump voters that, well, this is a good thing, sure, let him, everybody does it, was one of the arguments that I hear. Everybody does that, so he's just being open about it, so that's okay. Well, it's like, wow, insert any other crime into that sentence and say, well, everybody stole a car, so, when I did it, if I told you I stole your car, that makes it okay.
Yeah, I was open about the fact that I stole your car and broke into your house.
Exactly, exactly. And so that's, I think, concerning for me to see a lot of the reactions about whether it's important or not as a democracy again, that we care about, like, election corruption, okay.
Who cares? Yeah.
Maybe who cares? But some of these other issues around it are important.
Tremendously
and they're getting
important.
lost.
But he spoke last night in West Virginia.
That's right.
And he got the biggest hand when he talked about this phony Russian investigation.
People love to say, well, that's just the partisan stuff, and they're just going after you, and that's such an easy thing to dismiss, and folks want to believe that.
Yeah. We only have a couple minutes left, so we're going to have to wrap this up. But his Trump speaking out against Sessions, his attorney general, that seemed to be suggesting that he really was looking for a way to get rid of Sessions, put somebody new in there, try to get rid of Mueller.
That's right.
And so I think the next thing for us to watch for is, yes, he's going to try to get rid of Mueller one way or another.
Yeah.
I think,
And when he does that, how does the Congress respond? How does the Republican Party respond? Because that's going to be the critical issue. It's going to be up to the Republican Party to hold the line there and respond. And if they don't, we're in deep trouble. We have a serious constitutional crisis brewing. And Trump is clearly mobilizing his base to fight back and resist this. And I just think that that's very alarming. It's a very alarming situation looming on the horizon there.
Yeah, well, what are the efforts now to make it impossible for him to fire him? Well, there was something that happened in the Senate this week on that, but I don't know.
There's been a little pushback. I think some of the Republicans since they have the majority, are starting to realize we are going to distance ourselves from this, and we need to set up some controls. And maybe they'll realize the institution's more important than the
That's
person.
the test. That's going to be the test, really. I mean, this is it. If they let him get away with this, then we're in real trouble. We're in real trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
I think one of the things that the Senate could do, or the Congress could do, is to pass a new law that grants them the power to reappoint Mueller as the special prosecutor, the special counsel.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it can only be removed for good cause.
Right.
And Rosenstein has to be the one to do it, since Rosenstein appointed him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Sessions recused himself,
Yeah.
much to Trump's dismay, right? And so it has to be Rosenstein. If Rosenstein refuses to do it, Trump has to fire him and then put somebody in his place that would carry out the firing. So it would be a very messy Saturday night massacre
again.
type situation, and then it's a matter of how does the Senate or the Congress respond to that, and we're going to see what the Republicans are really made of at that point when that push comes to shove.
Yeah.
So.
I have to just share one small joke on this, though, to keep things humorous a little bit. The last time this many Americans knew the members of an administration was probably Watergate. We're throwing around everybody's name. Everybody knows who you're talking.
Right.
It's great in one sense, right?
Yeah.
But when's the last time? Haldeman, all those guys, right? Anyways.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, I think back to those days. My brother.
Everyone has made that comparison, but
Yeah, my brother and I were Watergate junkies back in the day,
Yeah.
watching
Oh,
the televised Senate Select Committee hearings
right.
and keeping notes. And I would watch during the day when my brother was at work, and then we'd switch and catch up with each other. But
well,
so
people
you
are
really
engaged.
were
People know the
engaged.
names of.
And,
Can
they
cite the
do.
name. No one could have done that. Who was
Yeah.
GW's office counsel? No one knows. Right? Even I don't know the answer to that.
And the late night comedians are having a field
Oh,
day
they're loving it.
also.
They're
And
loving
so
it.
I think people are, it's interesting how political the late night talk shows have
They're
become
doing
in
some of the
terms
best,
dealing with this
the
as
best
well.
That's
job.
right.
Yeah.
But meantime, he's doing an awful lot of harm to the country.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
environmentally, the civil rights
right.
areas, the sanctuary cities,
Yeah.
all these things.
There's so
are
many more
really-
issues and so many other critical issues.
Sounds like we got a lot of topics for the future here, right?
We do,
boy.
we do. Well, that wraps us up for today. So yes, many critical issues on the table for us to talk about. We'll be getting back to them, hopefully presenting an alternative view,
Yes.
a view that you don't get in the mainstream media, that you certainly don't get from Fox News, but not even from the mainstream media. So we invite you to come back again to view us discussing critical issues and alternative views. Thank you.